We got our buddy Nick Shepkowski checking in from Notre Dame SI. Nick, how you doing?
Hey guys. Hey Mark. Hey Matt. Good to see you guys. How you doing?
Doing well. Good to see you as well.
Nick, I need to call you Dad because Notre Dame just owned USC on Saturday and is probably heading for a 2 for this coming Saturday. So, hi, Dad.
That's the plan. That's the hope. I mean, I thought Notre Dame's women's basketball team was being a little undersold going into the year, thinking all the hype that, I mean, obviously you're going to get plenty of hype for UConn, always, Texas, South Carolina, what they've done. And it's like, yeah, Notre Dame, maybe they're a step down. I'm like, I got the best backcourt in the country, and it's not particularly close. And hopefully what happened Saturday afternoon in Los Angeles happens again Saturday afternoon in Los Angeles.
So I'll get us started here, and then I'll turn it over to Matt. So obviously, you've heard the name of a certain MAC school probably way more than you would like to hear that. So I won't necessarily need to say the full name, but NIU, of course, went into South Bend. And so as soon as that happened, much of college football nation wrote off Notre Dame and thought, okay, they may still be good, but there's no way they can make a playoff. And that's the most embarrassing loss in history and so forth and so on. But then they just started winning games after that. And most of those games could be discounted to some degree. But now when you start to win this many games in this dominant of fashion, and you had the likes of Navy being a quality team at its level, Army being a better version of Navy, being a much more dominant coming into the game, Navy version of Navy. And just, again, the game control, the dominance has been there week to week. Your thoughts about how good Notre Dame is and how much they've developed?
I think the thing with Notre Dame is, it's kind of like if you watch Ohio State closely, in that Ohio State, yeah, we're used to the Ohio State teams that can and at times will put up 45, 52 points a night. And it's like, holy cow, they can strike so fast. They can do so many things. But what makes Ohio State great is a great defense that just suffocates you. And it's not always the most exciting thing to watch, where you're not seeing Riley Leonard going and throwing for 300 yards, 400 yards. I think his top performance this year is about 225 yards in any given game. So it's not like they're throwing the ball all over the place. It's not like usually they're starting particularly fast either. Now, that game against Army the other night was kind of the exception of this winning streak, in that they get a 3-and-out, go and score, block a punt, go and score. You blink, it's 14-0. Knowing how Army operates, that game was pretty much over at that point. And so with Notre Dame, a lot in this winning streak, you look at the final scores and you see 49-7, 40-7, in these dominating performances. But there are kind of those slower starts where the defense is on fire, forcing 3-and-outs, forcing turnovers. But the offense is a little bit slower to get going. And then all of a sudden you look up and it's like, oh my gosh, what happened? It's 35-7, and this thing's over with 5 minutes into the third quarter. It's a defense that just, I mean, I would say since about 91, 92 is when I started watching Notre Dame closely, and it's as good as any that there's been since then, at least on this team.
So, Nick, most of our conversation tonight on our show before you came in was, are USC's failures more about Lincoln Riley as a play caller or USC's offensive line not measuring up? Now, I've planted my flag. I think, Lincoln Riley's play calling has not been acceptable. It hasn't been good enough. But this is not a takeover, skull-crushing offensive line for USC, a line that can take a hold of a game. Once it gets a foothold, it doesn't let go. It keeps the boot on the throat. So I'm thinking that Notre Dame's number one point of emphasis, our defensive line, USC's offensive line, we should be able to win that matchup. And if we win that matchup, there's no path to victory for USC. Is that fundamentally where you are, or do you see any other point as being more primary, more central to the outcome on Saturday?
I mean, I think that tells you everything about USC here the last 2 years. Lincoln Riley's first year at USC, that was one of the better lines in college football. And if you remember, yes, Caleb Williams wins the Heisman Trophy, but especially in the Notre Dame game, he made phenomenal plays. I'm not trying to sell that short in any way. what won that game for USC against Notre Dame 2 years ago was USC ran the ball at will. They can't do that this year from what I've seen. And what Notre Dame does with Al Golden as defensive coordinator, I don't have the actual percentages in front of me. I'm sure Pro Football Focus or another outlet that does the advanced stats has it. I have trouble believing that Notre Dame is not in about the top 5% of sending pressure. He brings pressure, and he gets creative in doing so. And if it's run-oriented, if it's pass-oriented, disguises it extremely well. I think it kind of reflects last year's game between these two teams a little bit as well, where after the game you heard Caleb Williams, you heard Lincoln Riley say, well, that looks like an NFL defense, not because of the talent, but because of the schemes that it's running. And for the most part, linebackers are a little bit younger on this team. We have a very veteran defensive line. You have a very veteran secondary. And it's like they've been calling it Golden 3.0. Is what Notre Dame's defense has been, because it's not just that Al Golden's in his third year at Notre Dame. So many of these key parts of this defense are in this third year, and you're really seeing it become like essentially an advanced course. But I think it all starts up front. I mean, I think you nailed it. Like if USC is going to let's face it, this USC team is not one that's going to light up the scoreboard and outscore you 45-42, especially like a team like Notre Dame. So what USC is going to have to take some time off the clock, I would assume, would be part of the game plan. Are they able to do that? I mean, this is when I think of USC, yeah, the great running backs come to mind, but man, Tony Baselli, Bruce Matthews, like you have Hall of Fame offensive line, Tony Munoz, like Hall of Fame offensive line after Hall of Fame offensive line. And when I was watching the UCLA and the USC game the other night, it's like, all right, when's the varsity guys playing? Because it just did not look the part. If you look Big Ten football in this country, like it did not look the part whatsoever. And that until that gets fixed, like the USC thing, look at all their great teams in front of every one of those great running backs or great quarterbacks was a very good offensive line. And this is, from my observation, thousands of miles away in the Midwest, this is nowhere near that.
So I think, if there is an optimistic angle for USC in this game, and I will confess, I'm not optimistic, but if you were to put forth the argument for USC in this game, I think it's this. The Lincoln Riley kept his cards very close to the vest. It was actually a very conservative game plan against UCLA. One of the things I talked about before you came on in the show and talking about Lincoln Riley's, very unsatisfactory play selection. He's not stretching defenses horizontally. We're not seeing as much of the, toys in the fun house. We've seen him just be so much more creative and expressive and expansive in the plays that he uses. It's interesting that a trick play is what, helped USC get the winning touchdown against UCLA, but we haven't seen him go into the grab bag as much. The thought process is, and a few people in the chat watching here at the Voice of College Football have mentioned this. Oh, he's saving the really good stuff for Maava and the RPO game and the option plays for Notre Dame. He felt like UCLA's offense sucks. We can win this game without having to show too much of what we do. And Notre Dame, that's going to be the game where we lay it all out on the table. What do you think of that? How concerned are you about that?
I mean, I guess it's something you always have to wonder about, but I mean, he had to go to the trick bag in order to win the thing. He couldn't, if any of those drives in the first half result in a touchdown instead of a field goal, you're looking at a different setup. And it's like, well, you don't have to get that creative. Just figure out something. I look at it and the down the field stuff, not so much of the short RPOs, but the down the field stuff, like that goes back to the offensive line. You can't throw the ball downfield if you can't keep your quarterback upright. And it's going to be more of that again this Saturday. Like Notre Dame, like I said, Al Golden loves bringing pressure, and that's what he's done. He did it against Texas A&M, that defense did, and had phenomenal results in that game. I mean, you go back and you look at the Northern Illinois game, it's not like they were being able to drop back and throw the ball downfield. It was a deflected freak pass that broke off for 86 yards that changed the entire direction of that game. kind of a freakish play. And otherwise, Northern Illinois wasn't throwing the ball. Like, this is, I guess it's possible, but I wouldn't be thinking that this is where you're going to bust out and all of a sudden, I'm going to start chucking the ball downfield, because this is a defense that really does not let that happen. And I would think would be the key point of emphasis is trying to prevent that from happening yet another week in a row.
USC has faced a lot of mediocre quarterbacks over the course of the season. And you could say quarterbacks that might have talent, but like they didn't put their best foot forward against USC, even if they had some upside. Dylan Raiola didn't play well. Will Rogers of Washington didn't play well. So now we enter the Riley Leonard part of the conversation. And, Notre Dame has not played, ferocious, fearsome defenses. I mean, Notre Dame, it was able to just grind the academies into dust, the strength advantage up front. That was pretty apparent. But, Riley Leonard has certainly evolved after his rough month of September. What's been the journey with Riley Leonard, seeing his progression? Like, did you arrive at a moment, Nick, when you felt, you know what, this guy is it, this is the guy? Or are you not there yet? Like, do you need to see Riley Leonard own this moment against USC in the Coliseum to say, now that's going to stamp him as a really good Notre Dame quarterback? Just where have you been and where are you now in terms of evaluating Riley Leonard at Notre Dame?
Sure. So I think in order to tell the Riley Leonard story, at least through this year, you actually have to go back all the way to last season, where Notre Dame gets by Duke on the last play of the game. Howard Cross III sacks Riley Leonard. Leonard injures his ankle on that play, goes off on crutches, comes back a couple of weeks later when Duke's playing Florida State, tries to gut it out in that game, ends up, he either has Duke in the lead or has them very close, but just cannot go in the second half of that game, ends up missing the rest of the season afterwards in that, and then enters the transfer portal, comes to Notre Dame. It was a injury to his ankle that he had to have repaired while at Duke still. Got that taken care of. Well, when they got in there and some of the swelling went down, it turned out that some of the screws that they put in needed to be resized because of some of the big damage that was done. Very convenient time for that to happen, of course, during spring football. So the first couple of weeks of spring football, is out for all of spring after that. So the times where you're getting those valuable reps of new quarterback, new team, new offense, new offensive coordinator, that wasn't able to take place early on in March. In April, when everyone else is doing so, because the reps are going to the backup Steve Angeli. The reps are going to the backup in CJ Carr and Kenny Mitchell at quarterback, and Riley Leonard sitting there and he's scooting around and he's got a cast on his foot or a walking boot on his foot after getting the cleanups done. So I think that's a very key part of it, because when this offense got going at the start of the year, the signs of it struggling were mightyful. The passing game was not good. And Notre Dame's gotten better at receiver, but there's still not anything, I wouldn't say anything special at receiver. But you look at Riley Leonard, and when you realized this guy's not a thrower, he's not a guy that's going to go, and a game plan's never going to be for Riley Leonard to go throw 30 passes and win you a game. But what it's going to be is when you combine him in a backfield that has, I think, it's right there with any in the country in terms of talent, with Jeremiah Love that can bust off a big play. We've seen it, saw it against Texas A&M, saw it against as recently as this week against Army. He scored a rushing touchdown in every game so far this year. And then you complement that with Jadarian Price, which is not the same breakaway speed, but still some of that breakaway speed. And he's 2 years removed from an Achilles injury. So he's really kind of finding himself at the collegiate level now once he's gotten healed and gotten recovered there. And then you factor in Leonard, where Leonard, all right, he's not this as a passer. He's not amazing as a passer. And it's the weirdest thing, because I'm not sure how much you guys have been able to, I get it. You don't watch Notre Dame up close week in and week out. But watching Riley Leonard it's interesting, because at no point you look and you watch and you're like, okay, he's kind of, all right, he's on the run. He never looks like he's moving fast. it's never like, wow, he's blazing quick. But he's got these strides of like a six, like Usain Bolt in a way, where his stride is so big and he covers so much ground when he does move his legs. Here's all of a sudden it's like, okay, well, he ran away from a corner. All right, this turned and 7-yard gain turned into 17 yards. And it just continues to happen. And so when you accept what Riley Leonard is, and you don't try to paint him and think he's going to be something else, which I think some Notre Dame fans are still having an issue with, of, well, get the guy that can throw more. Well, he might be able to throw more, the backup in Steve Angeli, but he doesn't run this particular offense nearly as well. The throwing dynamic, what it takes away from the running dynamic, is clearly not worth it, because this is one of the best running teams in all the nation. And Riley Leonard, as a runner, I think that has evolved. His shoulder injury that was suffered against Northern Illinois, when late in that game, he did not run the ball for the last quarter and a half because of his shoulder injury, and that's healed. And there's been no signs, no flare-up since then. And that's where this offense is really, between the growth of getting to just reps together, healthiness, and then better understanding what the expectation is. That's where this offense is taken off. That kind of answers the Leonard part and this offense as a whole.
All right, so now you're going to go up against a D'Anton Lynn USC defense. No more Alex Grinch fun times for any of USC opponent. And
I miss those days.
Yeah. I mean, and we're tearing our hair out at USC for an obvious reason, Nick, that if we had a D'Anton Lynn defense and the Caleb Williams offense, probably would have been playing for a national championship. But we never got to see that marriage occur. But now you're going up against a D'Anton Lynn defense, which, USC's had a lot of players missing, important players, Eric Gentry, Anthony Lucas. We can go on down the list. The defense has allowed just 13 points the last few weeks, but Nebraska's offense is not very good. Of course, don't tell that to Wisconsin. And UCLA's offense is not very good. So, how do you assess USC's defense? And, you've already mentioned this, that Notre Dame's going to run the ball. It's going to use Riley Leonard as a runner. Is it as simple as bludgeoning USC's defensive line and wearing them down? Is there a chess piece or like a chess move that goes beyond just the Irish sledgehammer this weekend?
Yeah, I think it's another part that's kind of come with that is Mitchell Evans, the tight end. I mean, you talk about Notre Dame, you talk about what always comes up: dominant offensive lines and some of the best tight ends in college football. Guess what you have this year? You had an inexperienced line at the start of the year that all of a sudden, despite only going into the year with 6 combined starts amongst the starters in week 1 against Texas A&M, they're in the semifinalists for the Joe Moore Award as one of those 10 teams. And that's all based off of guys that had not played at the collegiate level for the most part going into the year. So you have that. And you also have Mitchell Evans combined with Cooper Flanagan as well at tight end, a couple of the guys there, Eli Raridan as well, that you continue to get that production out of tight ends for Notre Dame. It's like rinse, repeat, same thing year after year after year. It just so happens in this case that with that part of it, I don't know. You look at the numbers, and I don't know if people understand how good like Jeremiah Love is as a running back, because like in the Army game, for instance, he only gets 9 touches in that game, 8 carries, 1 reception. 3 of those 9 touches went for touchdowns. And then it was a route, decided, okay, well, go up, 35-7 in the third quarter off of a 68-yard run by him, and decide, all right, think he's good for the night. Go rest up. Got USC next week. That's going to be a tough one. But that's been a large case of this year, is that you look at his touches and it's like 12 touches, 13 touches, 11. So his numbers don't jump off the sheet at you like, oh my God, that's a Heisman contender, or that's an All-American, or this or that. But his like big play percentage is right there with any probably player in the country. So that's, I feel like it's like a cheap way of being like, okay, yeah, the starting running back is a key player in this game. But I think largely when you just kind of look at Notre Dame statistically and you look at some of the numbers from Jeremiah Love, you think, okay, well, all right, yeah, I guess he might have home run speed or something, but it's just that they have a plethora of running backs. And what I think has been very key here the last couple of weeks, really the back half of the season, is they've been able to rotate backs. You haven't had to have that load back by the time November comes around that is completely worn down and beat up. There's fresh legs a lot in that backfield as well. So I kind of look at that. Jeremiah Love is a big time playmaker, even though he might not get the same media attention as some of the other stars in the offensive side of the ball in college football. And then for me, it's Mitchell Evans, who tore his ACL midway through last season. He's kind of at that point where you saw him really after the first bye week, and then they came back and played Stanford. That's where he really started to take a step. And it seems like he's almost gotten healthier and more confident in that knee that's been repaired and rehabbed week by week with that. And he's become a bigger part of the offense each week since.
Now, Notre Dame started this season winning at Texas A&M, and a number of the teams on the schedule, you're well aware of this, were posed what seemed to be before the season a significant threat, but it didn't necessarily pan out that way. The Louisville game to me was a game that, like, I was thinking that was going to be a meeting on the mountaintop. Of course, we remember that Louisville gave Notre Dame problems the year before. Is there a game that where you said or you felt that Notre Dame turned the corner, that Notre Dame really grew in your estimation, or is this USC game the biggest game in terms of caliber of opponent, raw talent on the opposing side of the ball since the A&M game? How do you get at that particular tension point?
I kind of look at it and I think it's probably that Louisville game, because I mean, this is talk about a confusing college football year. That's one of the most confusing teams that there is. Go out and sure, they lose at Notre Dame. They play Miami very close at home. They go and they end up just beating the daylights out of Clemson at Clemson at night, which just does not happen. Like, you look historically under Dabo Swinney in the last 10 years, that just does not occur. And they handed it to Clemson in that game. And then they go on the road to Stanford and lose in some of the most epic fashion of a game you're ever going to see. It's just, in an absolutely crazy year, that is one of the most roller coaster rides if you're following that Louisville team. But to kind of that Notre Dame Louisville game back in was it late September, early October? Now I'm forgetting. End of September. With that game, started off weird. Notre Dame set to receive. They botched the opening kickoff, fumbled, give that away. Louisville gets a short field. They score a touchdown right away. And you're thinking, oh my goodness, like, here we go. Freakish play, just like kind of at the start of that Northern Illinois game. What's going to happen? And then it's forced turnovers, quick touchdowns. You blink, it's 21-7. Notre Dame's in favor of that game. It ends up being only a one-touchdown game, and Louisville technically had a chance at the end. One of those, Hail Marys hopefully turn into the oop-de-oop and whatever else. Lateral thing was kind of their plan there at the end once they got within one score. But when you look at the game control, like, Notre Dame was up 2 scores in that game for a good 40 minutes in it. And it was playing to control that lead, not, light up the scoreboard and have the style points, so to say. And they dominated that game in that sense, even if the statistics kind of sit there and say, yeah, but Louisville, they were only 7 points away and this and that. So I think that was a turning point. I think it built a lot of confidence. And it also showed, it almost feels in a way like that USC team. I think Trojans fans will be familiar with it 2 years ago, where in Lincoln Riley's first year, 1, they didn't turn the ball over. And 2, that defense, it might have given up yards and gotten in some shootouts, but it turned the other team over. It was very good at being able to create turnovers. And I know that some of the stat heads out there will get, oh, you can't predict I get you can't predict them, but you consistently pressure a quarterback. You have good DBs that are very good in coverage. I'm just going to guess your turnover numbers are usually higher than other teams that don't possess those things. Notre Dame happens to have those. And I think that really started to turn its head and really started to be on display in that game against Louisville.
Just any other things that you have in mind as, like, you've circled these things as keys to the game, matchups, plot points that we haven't yet discussed? It's basically, giving you the floor for any other things you wanted to be sure to say, either about this game, about the rivalry, anything.
Well, I mean, I've talked to you about this before, Matt, and I'm sure it's come up with you before as well, Mark, is that, all right, it's another case this year. Notre Dame's playing for a college football playoff spot, potentially, likely a home game in that sense. USC's not playing for that. And it's really since the late 80s when you had that 88 game. Sure, you had 88 and 89 where both were kind of highly ranked. You had flashes here, 95, 2005, 2006, but the consistency of these teams both playing for something big. You had the Carroll years where USC was dominant, absolute, not just winning in this series, but winning like by 25 plus points on an annual basis in this series. You had the Brian Kelly era at Notre Dame where USC was down a bit and he never really got the full-fledged Notre Dame USC thing and got on his way and got out of town before, you know, he faced a USC team that was consistently competing for anything major. So it's like the rivalry has been down, but you look at this and you look at like the history of college football. All right, it might be more fierce when Michigan and Ohio State strap up. There might be more neighbor hatred when Auburn and Alabama get together. I get that, okay? You're in each other's backyards. This one doesn't possess that. What this one possesses, the most NFL draft picks of any rivalry that you're going to find, the most All-Americans, the most college football Hall of Famers, the most NFL Hall of Famers. You can't tell the history of college football without very quickly getting to the Notre Dame USC rivalry and how important these two were in the history of building each other up. That when that series was put together, Michigan and Fielding Yost can't go play those damn Catholics. Nope, can't do anything with the Catholics. So what does Knute Rockne do? Kind of like this year's a perfect example. Well, let's get on a train. Let's go to New York and play Army. All right, let's get on a train and go to the other side of the country and play USC. That's what we're going to have to do. That's what we're going to do. We're going to be a national program. I think it might not be like the fiercest rivalry in terms of hatred. You want that, okay, there's SEC ones for you. There's the Michigan, Ohio State thing. But in terms of importance and in terms of history, to me, it's unrivaled.
I will just say before I hand it over to Mark as we wind things down on our show, in 2 years, 2026, and I've told this to you before, Nick, 2026, the 100th anniversary of USC Notre Dame, we need to have double home uniforms. Notre Dame in green, USC in the Cardinal. 2 years from now, we need to make it happen. Like, I know, one wonders if, what if Teddy Hesburgh was around? Like, I'm sure that he'd try to make that happen. I don't know about Notre Dame's current administration, but that's one of the things that I want 2 years from now. We basically get, it'll be a Christmas game. It's Thanksgiving weekend, but it's right before Christmas. The green versus the red. That's something I very desperately want to see on the centennial of this storied college football rivalry.
Well, that's like, I don't know. There's a lot of people that aren't familiar with the history of it and think, Notre Dame and their green jerseys, they've probably done that forever. It's like, okay, they had a spell there in the 50s where that was the regular uniform, but it was done for the big USC game in 1977 that they come out, warm up in blue, go to the locker room, come back out for the actual game, and they're wearing bright green, and they go on and beat the tar out of USC that day. They turn a corner, and Joe Montana, some dorky kid from the middle of Pennsylvania, goes and leads that team to a national championship. Not that he ever went on to go do anything else, I don't think. But yeah, like I'm all for it. I love the idea. I remember when you said that a few years ago. I was like, that's if you're ever going to do it between these two teams. Like, I don't know if the blue and the red would blend quite as well, but the pop and green with the Cardinal red, that'd be an all-time uniform game.
Got to make it happen. We have to figure out a way to make it happen.
Somebody in the chat, Google, was it Joe Montana?
Joe
Montana.
That sounds right.
Somebody in the chat, Google.
I think he played. He had a play for the Chiefs or something.
The Chiefs, yeah. All right, great stuff with Nick Shepkowski. Check out his work there, of course, at Notre Dame SI. Is there anything you'd like to highlight that you've got working this week, Nick?
I mean, game preview stuff, a little bit of rivalry history we're going to get into in the middle of the week. And I guess one more key point, I know, Matt, you asked about it, and then I got into the rivalry part, and I'm passionate about this, so of course I go rambling on. But one more thing for the game, Notre Dame's kicker, Mitch Jeter, was one of the better field goal kickers the last few years at South Carolina. He's been battling a groin injury here the last 2-3 weeks, and he hasn't been the same since it happened. Now, Marcus Freeman was asked about that today after a missed field goal in the Army game the other night from 42 yards. And he's like, yeah, I know he missed it, but he struck the ball the best I've seen him strike a ball in close to a month. It's just something to keep an eye on. If this thing is close, if it comes down to a field goal, if there's an important field goal at some point, look at that for Notre Dame because that is certainly a case where the last month that has been, I wouldn't even say iffy. Iffy would be very generous. And as somebody points out their hip injury. Yeah, he had his groin wrapped for a hip injury the other day. But yeah, it has not looked when like Notre Dame special teams have improved here, especially since that other guy, Brian something, went to LSU. More priorities been put on things with them. The field goal game the last month has not been part of that. It's looked very ugly. And if it comes down to a field goal of significance, then Notre Dame could be in very deep trouble.
Nick, we appreciate you being here. And of course, Notre Dame games have been often blowouts, and they've been able to rest a lot of people, a lot of these players in the fourth quarter. USC, on the other hand, if it plays out the USC narrative, everything's decided by one score. So we shall see how this plays out at the Coliseum.
Something's due to change. I don't know what it's going to be, but something's due to change.
The next chapter in USC and Notre Dame, it's one of those games where all you have to do is see the two helmets and the two color schemes on the field, whether it's at South Bend or at the Coliseum, and it brings back so many memories, and it's just a good feel. If you love college football and maybe you're sick of a lot of things going on with the game these days, but as soon as the players hit the field and you see those colors on the field, you get chills because it is one of the great rivalries in our game. Nick, enjoy the game. Appreciate you stopping by and making this work for us.
Absolutely. Thank you for the invite. Good catching up, guys.